The Iron Druid Chronicles, first book, Hounded, by Kevin Hearne. So this has been highly recommended to me ever since I've started being such a massive Dresden Files fan as I've finished out that series and caught up to the current publication. And I can very much so see why. Now I want to address the elephant in the room though before we get into the actual review, because I do want to judge this book on its own merits, purely just that. But Iron Druid is very much so talked about as being kind of just a spin-off new interpretation of Dresden. And I'm not going to dismiss the fact that there are a lot of similarities here, not just the fact that we're in a first-person narrative in an urban fantasy setting following a snarky magic user around who makes a lot of pop culture references. It goes beyond that, and even the presentation and the authorial voice seems like an imitation of Dresden. Now, I'm not necessarily going to criticize that, right? A large part of the legacy of the fantasy genre is authors seeing other authors do stuff they really like and enjoy and having their own interpretation of it. Hundreds of people have tried to make their own Lord of the Rings. Thousands, maybe. That's just kind of what's a big part of fantasy. So I'm not even going to really count that against Iron Druid, but it's certainly worth note here at the beginning, like even to the point where a lot of the cover vibes, themes, look similar. I would assume a publisher realized, hey, we could easily target that audience as well, so let's craft something even in presentation that matches that vibe. Even down to the dog companion, there's quite a few things here that if you have read Dresden, you're gonna go, okay, that's that cool. But okay, that's out of the way. I don't hold it against Iron Druid at all. Very much so, this is its own story that has its own setting, build up, payoff. So let's go ahead and talk about its first book, Hounded. Essentially, this is the story of a multiple thousands-year-old wizard living in Arizona, going about his daily life, and things happen to him. And this is going to lend into my biggest criticism, which I want to get out of the way here at the beginning. Very much so, he's a passive protagonist for a good portion of the book. I would say well beyond the halfway point. It's just things happen to Atticus O'Sullivan, he recovers from them, deals with them, and then more things happen to him. Very rarely is he going out and doing anything actively himself. And that's a kind of big pet peeve of mine. You certainly can do a passive protagonist well, but it was just a bit overly done here, and I really wanted to see him take more action. Granted, the last chunk of this book is him certainly doing so, because he's been forced to do so. Beyond that, I also found the characterization a bit weak, while Atticus O'Sullivan himself, very well realized, very engaging and intriguing. Like, I'm a big lore and history guy, so if you can tie that into the character, the central point of what the narrative is itself, I'm hooked. And with him being this ancient magic user with a lot of history and relationships, that was compelling. That had me 100%, and everything that focused on that specific element of the story, I was reading like chocolate cake, just yes, more, please. I also really liked the relationship with his sidekick dog, Oberon. Cute, adorable, well done. Not anything we haven't really seen before, which is one of the biggest problems of this story, but a solid execution. So one last note on character though, aside from those two, everyone else was rather straightforward and shallow in presentation. This is certainly something that can be improved in sequels, but every character you meet, it's well communicated to you who they are, but who they are is fairly one-dimensional. So let's talk about something I hit on there though, with the presentation of a lot of cool ideas being extremely formulaic. Ideas, totally well done here. I like that we're going into Celtic lore. That's not something I've seen really well done in fantasy before, but nothing about it surprised me. It's just a presentation of Celtic lore in a similar fashion that we've seen in a lot of other urban fantasy stories, where it's just, here's the mythology, we're going to set it up and present it to you. And there are elements outside of Celtic lore. There's even a specific scene where Atticus O'Sullivan is saying, look, all gods exist. Somewhere out there, Buddha, Allah, Jesus, they're all chilling, hanging around. And that's the way this world is presented. And I like that. It's just that we're having Celtic mythology put at the center, and I really wanted a more heavy embracing of those Celtic themes. But outside of our main protagonist being a druid and a couple mentions of Celtic gods, it just felt like every other mythology repackaged for a fantasy story presented to me. And this same problem comes into the actual plot as well. Continually, we're just seeing beats hit before, and while they're executed solidly, I'm never surprised. Like, not ever am I shaken to my core by any narrative choices. They're good narrative choices, they're interesting, but it's just what you expect. And that's where it becomes abundantly clear that this was an author's first entry. And if you look at the author's bibliography, this is their first published full first novel. So I think there's quite a bit of potential to actually improve from here. And that's why I'm still going to pick up the second Iron Druid book. And I did like Hounded. I think it's a good, solid fantasy story. It's just if you're experienced in the genre, you're going to be going, okay, A, B, C, D, and then the story's going to go A, B, C, D. Action itself is actually one of the highlights here because I'm such a big fan of druids and I hate how underutilized they are in fantasy. So seeing a druid at the center stage of all these conflicts was magnificent, well done. It's just that, again, because we're dealing with a passive protagonist and this kind of redundant formula element where things are just happening to him and then he kind of doesn't even really respond, he just deals with the situation, cleans it up, and moves about his life to the point where, like, within a span of 4 pages, we have that happen twice where it's just, he's attacked, he deals with it, he moves on, he's attacked, he deals with it, he moves on. It hurts. Like, I'm frustrated with the potential versus the execution, but I'm still very excited for more stories from here. I'm going to talk about spoilers a bit in a minute here, but let me clear out the story a little bit better for those of you who are on the fence of whether or not you want to pick this up. Maybe if I let you know the actual driving plot, you'll be a bit more curious. An ancient enemy to our ancient druid is coming to try and retrieve a magical sword. See how it's kind of something you've definitely seen before? And we have this charming, badass, snarky wizard who is determined to protect this sword and keep it in his possession. Celtic gods rapidly come into play to the point where they are sitting down in his living room drinking smoothies with him, and it just seems like he's this grand figure to the point where he's powerful enough to have these gods sitting down with him. And it's interesting, right? To have a first book where the person is so established, so powerful that they can sit across from god-level deities and they're just, you know, casually shooting the and I wish that had been explored more to its fullest potential. But instead, we have these like super beings oddly playing around with what it seems like is a fairly low stakes in comparison story. So there's a slight bit of disconnect there. Overall, before I get into spoilers, I'm feeling a solid 5.5 to maybe a light 6 out of 10 for Hounded. I enjoyed it, but with 5 out of 10 being average, I can't really justify bringing it above that because it certainly slips below in a couple other elements. And I feel like just labeling it just above there for me now is my solid ranking for this first book in Iron Druid, with a little asterisk that I think there's quite a bit of potential to improve from here, and I hope it does do so. But now we will discuss spoilers, so if you do not want to know how this book ends and my thoughts on where things rest as the book lies, get out! Leave, I never want to see you here again. Just kidding, please watch more videos, this is how I make my living, but 3, 2, 1... spoilers. So we actually have ramifications for the big final showdown, which is actually something I want to praise this book for. Every bit of action has a cost, shows our main guy taking damage. Atticus is not invulnerable despite his experience and age, which I enjoy despite being a bit of a contradiction, but glad that is still the case. And the witch's coven that is set up is now split, and I actually found that to be the biggest hook for me to come back and read book 2. Nothing really else compelled me here in this book to be fascinated for the next entry, except to see how his relationship with this coven will proceed, and whether or not he is going to trust them or they are worthy of trust, because I'm not entirely sure. I have my predictions, and I'll be sad if all of them are right. But yes, that is a nice dynamic and is something I hope the next book focuses on quite heavily and is developed much more deeply. But almost everything else about this, from the old enemy chasing him in pursuit of the magic sword to the gods that are working with him and not, just felt like a thorough setup. And I get that that's what this book is, but it needed some more spice. It needed something on top to really intrigue me. And I'm just kind of surprised in how bland such a cool, different story and concept turned out to be due to the lack of fundamental, just bold narrative choices. And what we end up with is what kind of feels just like a solid club sandwich that someone forgot to season well. By the way, if you don't put salt and pepper in your club sandwiches, you're doing it wrong. Put some oil on there, salt, pepper, maybe some peppers. That's a good club sandwich. And I will say, now that we're in spoilers, Oberon's humor very much so frequently fell flat for me. It's cute, it's a nice little doggy, but the constant like sex jokes and meat dog things, just give him more than that. It felt very like, okay, I get it, the joke is he's a dog, he's a dog, I get it, he's cute, okay, cute dog, more, you need more, because they cannot have a character that is that flat be something that is so core to the whole series. I did like the dog, don't get me wrong, I just didn't like when the dog talked. And I avoided the Dresden comparisons for the meat of the review, but again, this is going to sound so harsh, and I hate saying it, but a lot of this came across as Diet Dresden, and you could have a much better interpretation of a similar story if you just want to pick up the Dresden Files instead. There's not a person in the world who is like, hey, I should start Urban Fantasy, which should I go with first? I would say Iron Druid first. A lot of Dresden fans, once they're caught up and want something in a similar vein, I could certainly see going, hey, you might like Iron Druid as a placeholder for the next book. And that feels awful to say because it kind of seems like I'm discounting this author's work, and I don't mean to. There is a lot here, especially if the next books are steps up in quality, and that's why I'm going to continue on to the next one to be impressed by. But as of now, book one, I'm going to struggle to do so. And in the future, if the series does improve, the recommendation is always going to come with, you get through the first book, and then it'll be a lot better from there. But that is my review of the first book in the Iron Druid Chronicles, Hounded! Let me know what you think of this series in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already, and you can get the book through the affiliate link that is in there as well. Have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my two latest high tier Patreons, Choik Nelson, I hope I'm saying that right, and Scott Cody. Thank you guys so much for the support. It means the world, especially with this move coming up. Moving is not easy and expensive. Yay. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.